Okay. 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 Turn this up. All right. I gotta see if I can. You can hear me? Oh, gotta press the live button. Oh, gotta press the live button. Got 3 whole people. Nice. Oh, gotta press the live button. Got 3 whole people. Nice. Oh, gotta press the live button. Got 3 whole people. Nice. Oh, gotta press the live button. Got 3 whole people. Nice. Oh, gotta press the live button. Got 3 whole people. Nice. Oh, gotta press the live button. Does this microphone sound better? Got 3 whole people. Nice. Oh, gotta press the live button. Does this microphone sound better? Got 3 whole people. I don't know why the audio is repeating itself. Nice. Oh, gotta press the live button. Does this microphone sound better? Got 3. Okay, I've changed the microphone. 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 The sweet clicking of my mouse. Yep. Changed the microphone. The sweet clicking of my mouse. Yep. Changed the microphone. The sweet clicking of my mouse. Yep. Changed the microphone. The sweet clicking of my mouse. Yep. Changed the microphone. The sweet clicking of my mouse. Yep. Changed the microphone. The sweet clicking of my mouse. Yep. Changed the microphone. Now I should start like singing the song. Yep. Changed. Something cool. Now I should start like singing the song. Yep. Changed. Something cool. Now I should start like singing the song. Okay, there we go. Did that fix the issue? Get all the way to live, let's see. Okay, does that sound better, and is the mic louder? I switched which microphone I'm using, so hopefully this one captures better. Perfect. All right. Welcome everybody to SquidCon. I guess I'm one of the first people, or I am the first person, so welcome. Very exciting. First time I've been able to join myself. So this is Paint Like an Anime Hero, and we're going to be talking about cell shading and painting in that style. So just real quick, if you want a copy of this presentation, because I'll have some like AI prompts and some examples, I put it up here on bandaru.com/animehero, or there's this QR code, so just FYI. So what is cell shading? Cell shading is making 3D models appear flat in 2D, like they just jumped out of an anime cell. So a fun little history note here is a cell is these little clear celluloids that's a transparent acetate sheet that were used in traditional hand-drawn animations. So that's where the term cell came from, for these little clear sheets. And people also commonly call this comic style. So when you're looking for resources and stuff online, you can kind of interchange those, whether you're looking for cell shading, or sometimes people just put it as comic style. And the core principles of this style is you need to have a basic understanding of light and volumes, just like you would with painting really any sort of figure, and so that you know where to place your shadows and highlights based on your chosen light direction. You know, usually, just like on miniatures and on stuff like that, you do it, you know, from the front and down, and from one of the sides, either left or right. And you also want to have high contrast, so the model reads super easily. And have it nice and saturated with colors, so it gives it a nice sense of energy and aliveness. Especially since you're going to come back with black lining and kind of knock that down a little bit. And finally, you want to create some really nice clear shapes on your forms to create your light and shadow, which is what gives it that cool 2D painting or drawing feeling. So you can see here on Goldie Roger from One Piece how each of the shadows and the highlights and the midtones are all very distinctly painted, and how it just makes him pop and look really cool and make him look like he jumped straight out of a screenshot. So very cool. This is one of my favorite styles for sure. Another thing to keep in mind is paint coverage. So you want to have consistent, very opaque coverage. Just like it would be a little bit weird to see, you know, when you're watching an anime or a cartoon, to see an anime character on screen who had patchy colors, or you could kind of see through them. Your models will look kind of strange if they got streaks and spots where you can see the underlying colors. So you want to make sure to just spend the extra time to get each layer completely opaque, even if sometimes it can kind of be a pain. And then in this style, it is definitely a lot about exaggeration. So it's commonly done through adding things like speed lines and wisps of light and shadow, or over accentuating details. Again, commonly using very vibrant, bright colors to make things look a lot cooler than they would in real life, to create that, you know, style and impact over realism. So like on this Gundam, for example, you can see here they've got these little light wisps, and you know, the shadows aren't doing it too much, but you can kind of see here, like a shadow on this wouldn't really look like this. Like you wouldn't have the little whip right here, little jolt out right there. But when you're doing it super stylized, it just makes it look that much cooler and really makes it have that reflective look. Kind of similar to the non-metallic metal style of painting, but even more exaggerated, and, you know, just kind of have fun with it, especially when doing these little light wisps and stuff. It's just, I always think those look super cool. Takes some getting used to kind of get used to it and whatnot, but that's where references and stuff come in, which we'll talk about in a minute. But at its core, cell shading is simply just deciding where your highlights, where your shadows, and where they meet. So you can see here, you know, for example, on the shield, you know, they decide the light direction is coming from the right and down. And so you can see, okay, here's your highlights, and it meets the shadow very distinctly. There's no, you know, smoothness between them. The light, you know, and it's very distinctly next to the midtone. And then, yeah, then it's just blacklining each part to intensify the contrast and ink the model, so it looks like a drawing. So just like you can see here, all the different black lines, where literally every single thing is black lined. On larger models, this is particularly important. On smaller models, you can kind of tweak a little bit. Sometimes if you blackline too much, you kind of lose your coloring. But on this style, so there are sub-styles within this style. So some people like to keep it very simple, and usually on models, this is what people tend to do on miniatures, is what people tend to do, is stick to about one shadow, one midtone, and one highlight per color. So for your green, you have a dark green, a mid-tone green, and a light green. Same thing with the red, and the blacks, the browns, whatever. And other people like to go wild, and then they throw in extra colors, they add in like reflections, complex graphics and shapes, stylized wisps and streaks. So really, just like any sort of painting style, you can literally make your own style and combine these different things and get all sorts of different types of looks for your cartoon style or cell shading. So like here's some examples. So for example, here on Cell Max from Onikuza 1658, they've gone with a very dramatic style of going very vibrant and then having really heavy dark lining, where they have taken the black and all of the deepest shadows they've just made pure black. So probably if you turn this guy around and look on the back, it seems like from the way they painted it that the back would probably be completely black, which is fine for if you're only going to be viewing it from this angle. There are also other ways in which you can paint these models, and so it reads from kind of all directions, or at least from multi directions. Or you've got like a more simplistic style like we have on Broly. This is kind of your typical starting point. You've got like your 2 to 3, actually I guess 3 to 4 different colors. You got the dark skin tone, mid-tone, highlight. Same thing on the hair, and then some black lining in the deepest recesses. This Gundam's got some of that wispy shadows and stuff I was talking about. And then on this Frieza, this is one of those ones that like they just went ham on it, right? Like they've got multiple levels of shadows and highlights. They got these purpley and blue reflections. They got the explosion, and it's just, there's a lot going on, and it looks super cool. Definitely would not recommend starting there, just because there's way too much to think about, but it is a super cool painting style. And then finally there's kind of this other style of classic or cartoony painting. This one's by Miguel Minis, and he's got kind of a mixture of blends, like here on the cape, it blends from yellow to black, but it's combined with that cartoony cell shading style of having really dark dark shadows, bright highlights, and having the high contrast where there's not blending in between. So like here on his abs and chest, and different places, like even here on the emblem with like the little shininess, there's no blending there. So you can do the kind of a combined too, where you have some blending and some not. It doesn't have to all be non-blended. And for this style, definitely recommend using references. A lot of good places to start is using anime art, Dragon Ball Z, Gundam, One Piece, Demon Slayer. These are some of the ones that a ton of people paint these figurines in this style. So you can find a lot of people these days on Instagram or YouTube, particularly Instagram, painting these type of figures. You can look at older cell shaded style games. I guess not the games themselves, but their artwork. So like Chrono Trigger, old anime RPGs, think Super Nintendo, PS2 time frame, or newer cell shaded games like Dragon Ball Fighters. The new Zelda games have been doing cell shaded style, and Also tattoos. There are a lot of really cool anime tattoo artists, and they follow these same principles. And you can do existing cel shaded models from other painters, 2D artwork, and AI, which at the end got some AI prompts and kind of showing what you can do with AI on this, which is pretty cool. So like for example, on the Goku, Gohan, and Cell Final Form models that I did a while back for a diorama, as well as the Ginyu Force, I used a lot of references from Dragon Ball FighterZ, particularly because that was a game I was playing a lot at the time, and I just really like the style that they use in the game artwork, where it's using that, you know, cell shade style. Like these are screenshots directly from the game, and you can see how it does really good at following that cell shade style, very dramatic shadows to highlights. You know, it doesn't necessarily have the black lining, and it's a little bit different than what you do on the model, but gives you a really good starting point. Here's some references I used for Zoro from One Piece. Kind of just helping get an idea of, okay, these are the type of colors I would use for shadows and for the main skin tones and the hair, and just, you know, how dramatic you can go. And also found an example from I don't know how to say it, Mama on Paint. She's a Japanese painter, and she does a lot of really cool cell shaded work where she simulates light coming from multiple directions. And so unlike that Cell Max one that I was talking about earlier, this one actually is painted so from the back and the front it all reads as kind of like your normal lighting, as opposed to, like, you know, if you paint it more traditionally, one side's basically either all black or all in shadow, and it only looks good from one angle, which is really cool. So yeah, if you end up getting the slides, there's all these. Anytime there's an artist mentioned, these have a link to their either YouTube channel or Instagram. But definitely recommend checking them out. She does some really cool artwork. But then just other stuff. So I mean, there's, like, you know, like I was saying, older games. So like some older Zelda artwork. You know, mangas. So, you know, Dragon Ball always has, you know, really cool styling. Demon Slayer. You know, you can see just how dramatic, like, the water effects and stuff are. Those are cool to copy. And yeah, just lots of resources you can use. And like I said, initially, especially, it's really helpful just to see what other people have done and then just trying to copy it. And then it's also now cool that we can use AI to help give us a jump start. So to illustrate this, I took some of my models, so this one from Infinity and these guys from Blood Bowl, and just threw them into Nano Banana and asked it to turn them into some shell shaded styles. And I think it actually did pretty good. It seems to do pretty good with if taking pictures of ones that are already painted and then, you know, turning those into cell shaded. Like you can see how, for example, on the orcs, it did pretty good on like the cast shadows. Like the shadow would be cast right here from the, you know, the chin. If the light was coming from, you know, above and from the left, it's got some little reflections and stuff. So definitely play around with AI. It can give you a good starting point, so you're not just trying to figure out all on your own from the beginning. But definitely, I mean, it's not perfect. You don't need to follow exactly what it shows you, but at least it'll give you a starting point, and then you can tweak it as you go to make it look good, just like with anything else. This is like a really old model, so this is actually one of the first models ever painted. This little orc from Arcadia Quest. And this is just in the typical wash, basically base coat and wash him. I don't even think I applied any highlights to him. But I threw this on AIs too and just said, hey, turn this into cell shading, and this is what it gave me, which is actually not too bad as far as a starting point. So again, fun thing to play around with. Gives you a good starting point. It's not perfect, but better than starting from nothing. And then I also tried taking this just color of just a Space Marine that's not painted yet, and just ran this prompt. So I just said color this Space Marine in cell shading style, comic style with really dramatic shadows and highlights. and I want the main color to be blue, with chest emblems being yellow, and their guns having a blue plasma coil-like glow. And, you know, these are what it gave. So Nano Banana, I like Nano Bananas a little bit better, but I will say the GPT had a little bit better as far as the forms on like the shoulder pads and the helmet. It just gave a little bit different light and direction. So, yeah, kind of cool. Here's some tattoo examples. So this is one from Michaela Botin, I don't know how you pronounce her name. But they do really cool anime art. Or Simon Bell, they also do a lot of really cool anime art. You can just see, you know, those really dramatic shadows and highlights and stuff, and really cool for references. And then here's some minis. So these are some I just found on Pinterest. You can see same thing applies, it's just in a smaller area. So with miniatures, I do want to note one thing in particular is, particularly on these, you want to try and vary the thickness of your black lining, even more so than you do on larger models, just to help keep them readable, give a little more variation, and make sure you don't cover up too much with the black. And then, you know, I like on some of these, you can see, for example, on this one, all this little hatching effect, which is just making lines. Really cool. It's a cool way to create that kind of beat up look, or like weathered look. So yeah, there's some cool miniature examples. And then, yeah, again, if you want, copy this, you can go to bandaru.com/animehero and get this and whatever. So you can have the links to all the artists. And here, this is probably like my favorite cell shading artist right now, Alucard 2021. This is one that I use a lot for inspiration. He's actually the one, I think he's the one that did the Frieza I showed earlier as well. But just his style is just crazy. Like, it just looks so good. Like, they all just look like they just literally popped out of a 2D drawing, which is just so cool. So the painting steps for cell shading is pretty simple. You're first going to set your light source. So you can start with one light direction, or two if you want, just like you would on a normal miniature. You know, either one from the front, one from kind of the back and above. You know, here's an example of what I did on Goku and Gohan. So I had a light coming from the front, because obviously they're shooting a Kamehameha. And then I had one from the back, so that the back wasn't completely, you know, dark. And you can see how that, you know, is interpreted with, you know, the brighter highlights up here on his shirt, a little bit on his pants, and the hair and whatnot. On this one, I could have gone and stylized it so, you know, their hands were more like blue and glowy, but I've actually got, as part of a diorama where I've got a glowing orb in the middle, so it yeah, it actually lights him up that way, and so it creates the same effect, so I didn't want to paint it on there. And then step 2 is to choose your colors. So you want to make sure that you have really good saturation and that your colors are very bright and vibrant. And later on, you can add deeper shadows and additional spot highlights and your stylized light streaks and whatever. But typically, you just start with 3 steps per area. So your shadow, midtone, and highlight. So for example, on the green, you've got your dark green, midtone green, and then like a brightest yellow green. You know, the yellows, kind of a darker brownish orange, the yellow, etc. On this guy, you know, in this little kind of organic material that's connecting his body, I did kind of a more pinkish purple to like a deep maroon, whereas on the skin it was like a dark purple to kind of a pink, or like a, yeah, off pink, and then black is just, you know, black to dark gray. So choose your colors, keep them vibrant, and then the next step is just building up your volumes. So you can basically just throw blending out the window, which is one of the best parts of this this style, and just focus on shapes. So you usually want clear, hard edges to your shapes and obvious jumps in brightness between your layers. And then the order of how you apply shadows, midtones, and highlights will greatly depend on the colors that you're using. So for example, here on the Ginyu Force, they have a lot of these yellowy shoulder pads and armor, and like on, you know, right here on his chest and on the shoulders. And as many of you probably know, yellow notoriously sucks and it's hard to paint, especially over darker colors. So on these ones, I would start with the lighter color over a white. So do white and then the yellow to get super vibrant yellow, and then come in with the shadow colors and build those up, which is fine on these ones because it's a big area. You know, it's easy to get the brush in there or whatever. If it happened to be an area that was more difficult to get to, then maybe consider doing the opposite, where you do start with the shadow color and then move up to the highlight, just so that you can avoid mistakes and whatever, and not get paint on places that you don't want to. So, whereas other colors, like, you know, the black, obviously you start with black, work up to the lighter gray, and, you know, same thing with the red, deep red to bright red. You know, same type of thing that applies to miniatures and whatnot. And then here's just some examples for different, like the different shapes and how they look in normal shading versus cell shading. So for spheres especially, right? So you got like the really bright spot right here, and then it goes into the deeper shadow, and it's all very smooth. In cell shading, this can be broken up into 3 or 4 or more stages, right? Where you got your super bright, mid-tone, gets a little darker, where each step is like super punchy and super differentiated. And then this example just is using 2 tones, which can also be a good place to start, where you just have like your shadow and then your mid-tone, kind of get your forms and then worry about highlights later. But with this one in particular, you know, I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention as you're doing cell shading, a big part of the style is also keeping in mind where the shadows are cast and emphasizing those. So you can see like in these, you know, this is showing the shadow being cast from this box, goes across here and here, and then, you know, you won't have the, unless you're doing like a diorama where you actually want to have the shadow cast on the ground, you won't have that, but on the other objects, you will. So, like for example, on like a chin or something like that, right? You got a strong light, you know, you'd cast or you'd paint in the shadow color for, you know, that's being cast from the chin on his neck, right? Stuff like that. And then step 4 is black lighting, and this is where the magic really happens, where all of a sudden things really start to come together. So a lot of times when I'm painting cell shading, you know, it can kind of look funky up until this last stage. You know, it still looks good because you can see some differentiated areas with your shadows, midtones, and highlights, but just the whole style itself looks weird until you add this step. And this is where, you know, you can use either a fine brush, and I tend to like to use black ink just because it flows super nice and it doesn't dry like super fast on your brush. You don't have to worry about adding thinners or anything like that. But you can also just use thinned black paint, and, you know, optionally add some some slow dry medium or something to it, so that it doesn't dry as fast. And you can use a really fine tip brush to get in some of these areas, or you can use micron pens. So I really like to use these Micron 003, which is a 0.15 millimeter size, just because it's so tiny and you can just get in all places. You can use other sizes too, depending on the size of your model, but 0.15 is awesome. Like, that's like my go-to. And some examples of this is on my Goku and Gohan. You can see here's before black lining, and you can see how it looks. I mean, it looks good, but it doesn't have that final punch compared to after. You know, it just reads so much better, and it just stands out so much more. So, and then you can also see on here, I've got more of that hatching, which is just, again, just lines, you know, really thin lines next to each other, and you can kind of do them in the same direction. You can kind of cross over them, however you want to do it, but it just gives that kind of beat up look, which is fun. And then same thing here on Zoro. You can see before, and you can, still looks good, but once you black line, that's when, like, he really pops and stands out. So, and yeah, let's kind of all I had on presentation wise. I've got some of the minis on my desk if anyone's got like questions or wants me to show like kind of in real life what the minis look like instead of just on a slide. And yeah, kind of just look in the chat if anyone's got questions, or in the meantime I'll turn on this camera and we will put all these different figures. We can kind of show what they look like from different angles because that's kind of hard to capture sometimes on camera, like in a photo. So I guess we can look at Gohan first. As you can see here, like, you know, so the lighting was from this direction. So you can see all, you know, the highlights are obviously coming there on his face. The side of his face is very dark, as well as underneath his arm. Like if you look from this direction, everything under here, this is all almost pure black. This is like a blackish purple, and so I can still see the black lining. But then if we turn to the back, you can see the light. So the initial light was coming right from the front and this way, and then I imagine there was a secondary light that was kind of like this direction, just so that we could get, you know, up on the shoulder, tips of the hair, etc. Yeah, so as far as what kind of brush I prefer for this, it kind of depends. For some of these little lines, like on his hair, let's zoom in like here. So for these, I mean, it can be useful to have the longer ones just because you can like really drag it and it keeps like that smoother line. But then for like the little hatching and stuff like that, I tend to use like a smaller brush, like just like a normal miniature painting brush, like size 1 or 0 even, and just make those. But it really just depends. I mean, I've kind of used both, but like for these longer ones, you know, it definitely does help to have that longer brush. It feels weird and it takes a little bit of getting used to, but it does make it so you can get some, you know, some smoother lines. So like for example here on Goku as well, let's fix the focus here. You know, like in this area you could use that longer brush in that little crevice. You know, this on this, you know, kind of part on his foot, I use the smaller brush just because it's easier to control. Whereas if I had the long one, I'd possibly get it like up on his like ankle or something. And then, yeah, the question about talking about shapes. How do you decide on the shape of the shape of the shapes? But like choosing highlights, yeah, a bit like choosing highlights for non-metallic metal. Yeah, so yeah, basically, I mean that it comes down to understanding shapes and forms, right? So, you know, for example, on this guy, let's see, let me show it on Cell. I like on Cell a little better. Let's zoom this out. Wrong direction. So, I mean, really here you just have to, similar to on your minis, kind of think about your shapes as far as like in the form of planes. So on here you obviously have on his head, it's basically like you just took a marble and stuck it in his head, so obviously that's a sphere, right? You know, arms commonly think of as cylinders, but you also got, you know, take into account the different planes as far as it going into the like following the shape of the planes, right? So on here, like, yes, his arm is technically, you know, could be a cylinder, or not cylinder, a cylinder, right? So the highlight would be right here down the middle, or the mid-tone, but because it has this little indent, you kind of get 2 cylinders, right? So that's why you have the highlight there and the highlight there. And then on the you know, on the face, you know, this is also kind of like, you could imagine if you solidified this, this would be one cylinder, and so the main highlight spot would be right here in the middle, right? And so that's why right here you can see the yellow highlights right there on his head, right? Kind of same thing with the muscles, right? I imagine like this specific muscle, so like his leg itself is one cylinder, but each of these little muscles you can kind of imagine like a cylinder, right? Because it's just you don't necessarily need to imagine like it's actually that shape, but you know it follows that type of shape. Like this side of it curves like a cylinder would, right? So again, there's the center highlight just like on a normal cylinder. There's a highlight just like another cylinder. Same thing here. This is like kind of like part of a sphere, right? And so shadowy area here on the bottom, midtone in the main area, and then highlights on, let me switch this to manual focus so it doesn't keep losing focus. There we go. And then yeah, highlights are up on the top. So, and then same type of thing here. This is, you know, again, kind of another cylinder, right? So the darkest point, midtone, highlight area. So yeah, it's all just about breaking down shapes. You know, and then, you know, if we look at Zorro here, same type of thing. So on his swords, those are basically cylinders, right? So the shadow area is on this side, the midtone in the middle, and then highlight on the very top. And then, you know, same type of thing here on his little, not a cloak. I'm drawing a blank on what this thing's called, but his robe thing, right? Each one of these is kind of like part of a cylinder. So again, you've got, as it goes in, you got your deepest area, and then the midtone and the highlights right there in the center, just like you would on a normal cylinder. You know, same type of thing here on his arm. You can see, you know, the highlight's gonna be right in the center. If I imagine kind of a cylinder going that way, a little mini one that way. And then the cave, this one's just a whole bunch of complex shapes, so we're not gonna get in that one, but, and this one's kind of more of just being creative and being like, oh yeah, shadows, and those are kind of gonna fall in there, and it's a lot of imagination, I will say that. So it's a lot of imagining, you know, where your light source is coming from, how it's hitting the model, and, you know, similar to minis, you just kind of imagine, okay, this is where it's going to hit the strongest, and that's where you paint those highlights the strongest. Hopefully that answers that question. Another question, so how many coats of paint are you generally using to get opaque layers? Are you going over a single color several times? Yes, so a lot of times, and it depends on the color, right, and the size. So like when I was painting, you know, the Ginyu Force, for example, these guys obviously are smaller, and with different colors, they required less layers because this color just covered or better than others, right? So like whites, for example, I had to do like 5 or 6 layers just because white is notoriously crappy. But it depends on what white paint you have now, right? So speaking of white, my favorite white now is the Pro Acryl Bold Titanium White. Like, it's the best acrylic white I think I've ever used. It just covers awesome and not chalky at all. So definitely recommend that one. But yeah, so usually what I do is, you know, paint a color, get it completely opaque, do the next color, and then work around the model in the different spots. And so, for example, like on the grays even, it'd be like I'd hit there, hit the horns, you know, turn them around, hit the back, hit the here on the arms, and then after that, I would then look again and say, okay, is that completely opaque? And if not, then I'd hit them again. So it just depends on the color, just like in miniature painting, as far as the number of layers, and it also depends a lot on the colors. But yeah, a lot of times yeah, it was definitely like 3-4 layers sometimes even more than that. So it really just depends on the color, and that's um, another reason why it's important when you're picking your colors to, if you can, use colors that cover well. It just will save you some. I've used just acrylic paint on all of these. Like these are, so I think on Goku and Gohan, I used a lot of paints from Vallejo and P3. Same thing with these guys. But I have started experimenting a bit with lacquers, which cover a lot better, but they're also a lot harder to work with, and they're really smelly, so they can really quickly give you a headache. But like the mama that I was talking about earlier, the Japanese painter, she paints primarily with what's the Mr. Color, I believe is what it is, which is a lacquer paint, just because lacquers tend to cover really well, but you gotta thin them with lacquer thinner, and then they're very smelly, and because you're thinning with the lacquer thinner, they sometimes can pull up some of the layers underneath. But yeah, I'm experimenting with those now too. But for everything here though, I painted them with just pure acrylic paints just because they're easy. So yeah, just acrylic paints, and then yeah, as many layers as you need. It just depends on the color. Let's see if there's any other questions here. Yeah, and again on paints, I mean, mostly the paints I use nowadays are still Vallejo, like they're probably my top brand, the ones I have the most of, but I'm really liking the AK now, and then Acryl has also been really fun to use, so all of them acrylic. Yeah, lacquers are very stinky. Like you definitely need really good ventilation if you're using the lacquers. Yeah, definitely want to wear a respirator and vent the room. If not, it's like instant headache, brain damage, all that. So, but yeah, especially if you're doing these on miniatures, I've got a plan to do. So there's a creator on My Manufacturer that did some orc, like Ninja Turtles, and so I've got those 3D printed, and I'm actually going to do those in a cell shaded style in the next while, foreseeable future. So when I do that, it'll be up on my YouTube channel as well, which is Bandaru. And yeah, you can see I've got full videos of Goku, Gohan, Cell, Ginyu, and I always forget this guy's name, but this other guy, I got videos of them all up on there. So if you want to watch those, you can check those out. And then in here in the PDF, so if you again go to bandaru.com/ what was it, hero, yeah, right here, bandaru.com/anime hero. You can grab this PDF, and I've got here at the end this list of a bunch of cell shaded artists that are just super awesome, and this has links to all of them. So like Alucard, like Repaint, Taka Company does really cool ones on YouTube and Instagram, and then Epic Duck Studios has a whole mini painting playlist that I just found, and those are pretty good. And then yeah, there's these AI prompts here, so you can, like, this is what I use for Nana Banana to turn my miniature into a cell shaded style, and then it's got ones for Stable Diffusion, Dolly, Midjourney, etc. So Any other oh, here we go. Another question. What would you recommend to get in terms of figurines for people to start out? I mean, if you could, so I painted in various different sizes. I mean, you can see the difference in size between Cell and like he's like so big I can't be in focus here, and these like little guys. I mean, I would start honestly with like something like a 75 millimeter miniature, just because it gives you enough room to create the effect, and it's not so small that like you're limited. Because you know on miniatures you have such a small area to work with, it's hard to really get that punchy look to it. But on 75 millimeter, it's a good in between. Because like you're bigger or about the size of these smaller figurines where you have enough room, right, to like make out these forms and to do the effect. And so yeah, that's what I would say is find like a cool 75 millimeter mini you like, or these little mini figures. These are from it's called like Dragon Ball Adverge is what these models are from. It's like a whole collection of Dragon Ball figures. But you can also just find, you know, any anime figure you're interested in. Because I mean, the difficulty doesn't change, which is what's cool. It's just the amount of paint you got to do, right? And in doing those opaque layers, it's just, you know, how many layers do you want to go through and paint? Because like for example, on Gohan and Goku again, right? Like doing all this yellow and like even some of the darker browns and stuff, like they just took like multiple layers of paint, and just because of the sheer volume of how much I had to paint, I mean, painting these two guys took like 100 hours. So, and I mean, I can be a kind of a slow painter, so it's not to say it's going to take you that long, but just keep in mind, like as you do go bigger, it's going to take longer to complete the model. And so, as with anything painting wise, right, like the faster you can try something out, finish something, and then try it again on something else, like the faster you're going to improve. So that's why I say I think 75 millimeter or a little bit bigger even is kind of the sweet spot, because again, it gives you enough room to create the really separated highlights and shadows and midtones, and it gives you room to do the black lining where it doesn't just easily like mesh together. Yeah, trying to do the sharp edges over multiple layers can be time consuming, just because I mean you're needing to have that brush control, right? Like really, you know, to keep it smooth. So yeah, same thing there. Yeah, best models to start with, the ones you're excited about. So whatever you're excited to paint, just like your normal mini painting and whatnot, if you're excited about it, you'll put more effort into it, you'll try harder, and then you'll get a better result, and you'll enjoy the process and learn from it. So any other questions? We still got 10 minutes or so, or we can end here if no one else has any other questions. Again, the main things here I think is just find a model you like, you know, get a good understanding of light and volumes, just because even more so than on your, you know, normal minis and stuff, you need to understand where those shadows and highlights, particularly the highlights, go so that it reads properly. You know, because if you're highlighting places that don't make sense, it's just going to look kind of like a little muddy mess. But it's a good exercise to get more familiar with your shapes and your volumes and light. And doing this style, I feel like really helps improve your normal style of painting, right? Because then once you do this, it helps with being able to sketch in that light on your normal models, and then you can do your blending or whatever other style you want to do on those. And yeah, overall, it's really cool. It's like one of my favorite styles right now to be painting in. You know, I'm I'm still improving, and there's always room to grow. So definitely recommend everyone trying it out. Awesome. Cool. I think that looks like everybody answered everyone's questions and stuff. Unless anyone's got anything else, I think we will wrap it up. Yeah, definitely, definitely trust the process. It's one of those things where, just like with painting miniatures, there's gonna be ugly phases where you're like, okay, is this really gonna end up looking good? Just trust the process. Keep going through it. Blackline it, and then decide. So, and even then, you can still go back and tweak it. So, it's the best thing about painting with the stuff we use. You can always paint over it. Cool. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. So, everyone, thanks for joining. Thanks for your questions and stuff, and hope that's helpful in, getting shell shading down. I'll put a link to where you guys can grab the slides if you want. Again, that's just in case. I mean, if you don't, that's fine too. I just figured I'd make it an option for anyone who does want it. Particularly so you can get all those links and stuff just easier than sharing here. But I'll post that there, and then, yeah. We'll see you guys in the Squidmar Discord.